Hey guys, next weekend, I'm celebrating my 37th wedding anniversary. So I wanted to do a video next weekend on my anniversary. And it's funny, I might have even said it on here that it would be my 38th. For some reason, I was thinking it was 38. And my wife's like, no, it's 37. I did the math and it'll be 37 years. And the weirdest thing, when I was 37, I remember sitting at my mother's kitchen table, drinking a cup of coffee, and saying something about being 38, and she corrected me and told me I was 37, and I did the math. I'm like, yeah, you're right, and I was so happy. So it was funny when I thought I was 38 and found out I was 37, I was like really happy. And but this time I was kind of like sad, like, oh, I thought we were married longer, but I don't know why I do that. I don't have dementia. Trust me, like I said, I did it when I was 37, just certain numbers in my head, and you get so busy with life, things, you know, I don't know why. But I'm not doing it next weekend because honestly, this weekend I have an opportunity to do a video, and I really feel led to do a video. And the ones I had planned, I was going to really dig deep into apologetics, a couple apologetic things that people have been commenting on that I wanted to address. You know, Protestants are saying, oh, well, what about this? What about that? You know, and giving me their arguments for things we believe. So I wanted to address that. Also, I had planned a Protestant scholar. But, you know, like I always say, you know, the smart Protestants understand that as Catholics are their brothers in Christ. And he's, of course, very smart. He's president of a Christian university. Actually got his THD. It's like his PhD, but in theology, I guess. From a Catholic university, so I was going to ask him about that. And we were just going to have a friendly conversation, and he agreed to it tomorrow night, but I had to email him and cancel. And I had to cancel all of this because the hurricane that just went through Florida. And then, you know, by the grace of God, we didn't lose any power. We didn't lose power for a minute. I have friends that still don't have power. You know, they're using a generator. We didn't get flooded. The town next to me, homes were like flooded above their houses. Cars were totaled, flooded above the car. And somehow, by the grace of God, none of that happened to us. But we did have a lot of damage to trees and a lot of cleaning up. I've been off for like 5 days from work, been just cleaning up. And contrary to what the liberal media would have you believe, America is not that divided. We're all helping each other out. It doesn't matter if you have a DeSantis sign or a Charlie Crist sign. We're helping each other out, you know. And it kind of reminds me of our first, you know, where this division started in the country. And I just want to share this because I think it's important. Then I'll get on the marriage subject. You know, I seen the division after 9/11. We were united. George Bush had us united. I mean, he wouldn't even say a bad word about the Muslim religion. He went out of his way to say they're a religion of peace. I mean, we were united until, you know, the Democrats decided identity politics was the way they were going to win. And so Obama started attacking cops, you know, saying, you know, this cop acted dumb going in to his friend's house and did it because he was racist. But he was following, we later find out, and it was obvious to most of us, he was just following police protocol. It didn't matter if his friend was black or white. And then he made a big thing about Trayvon, you know, how this country is racist. And if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. And I remember I was working for Frito-Lay at the time, and I was in Paramore section of Orlando. They call the hood, but, you know, I grew up in Newark and Irvington, and to me, it doesn't seem like the hood, but, you know, they say it's the hood, you know. But I remember, like, there was like a dozen young African-American guys hanging out in front of the store. I was bringing my Frito-Lay card in. You know, yo, what's up with Trayvon? And I said, that's messed up. The dude that shot him's a punk. He couldn't take a beating, so he shot him. And they're like, yeah, that's right. We're just messing with you. And they opened the door for me, you know. But they knew that the liberal media was making it seem like there were going to be a race riot, and there was nothing, you know. So anyway, I just wanted to share that in Florida, just like in everywhere else in America, when there's trouble, Americans help one another. There's been more rescues from civilians, yes, using their own gas, their own boats to go to rescue fellow Floridians. I mean, whatever they got. Some guys are using jet skis. Some guys are using rowboats. Some guys got speedboats. Whatever they got, they're using. And they're doing more of the rescue because there's just more of us, you know, civilians than first responders. And they're not asking, are you a Republican or a Democrat? You know, we're all helping brothers, you know. That's what we do. So I just wanted to share that bit of news, what's going on. But even next week when I did this, you know, how I stayed married 37 years, it was going to be 38 years until I realized I've only been married 37 years. I wanted to do it because I thought it'd be interesting. And I was going to do it like exegetical. I was going to take all the verses on marriage and exegetically do it. And I realized, you know, I've done that before. And today I'm just going to, you know, do a simple video. And I'm going to give you the advice that was given to me, you know. I just sent out a little meme to my kids. I think it was Dr. Mandel, the motivational doc, had it on his. And he said, you should take advice from your elders, not because we did everything right, but we got more experience doing things wrong. So if I did a video about everything wrong I did as a husband and a father, this video would be hours and hours long. So I'm going to keep it to everything I did right. I think I did right. Some good advice I've taken. You know, I was a Protestant evangelical Christian for 30 years of my marriage and Catholic Christian for 7. So a lot of my advice comes from Protestant preachers that I knew personally. You know, there's an old Chinese proverb that I live by. Don't go to a doctor who's unhealthier than you. And, you know, when I go for marriage advice, I go to guys I see that have been married longer than me. And every one of my pastors, Protestant pastors, were married longer than I was, and they're still married. And they gave me good advice. And they've all preached exegetically some great sermons on marriage, and I've tried to do my best. I've done that in the past. I have some videos where I exegetically, you know, verse by verse, tell you what the Bible is telling us about marriage. So a lot of my advice comes from the Protestant side, but actually I thought about it this morning, and the best advice I got was from a Catholic Bible scholar that when I invited him on, it wasn't even about marriage. It was about the latest book he wrote, and that would be Dr. Scott Hahn. And I'm going to share that advice in a minute. Well, I can tell you, he said the most important thing in marriage is forgiveness. To be able to forgive and to be able to ask for forgiveness when, in other words, you know, say you're sorry. And I'm going to touch more on that bit of advice later, but I'm going to give you some other advice I was given throughout my life that I thought was pretty good. But again, like I said, most of my marriage, I was a Protestant, and my wife and I both believe with all our heart that if we were Catholic Christians most of our marriage, we would have avoided a lot of problems and pitfalls that we did as Protestants. And we both really wish that we were Catholic the whole marriage. But for some reason, God allowed us not to be. So maybe because we made so many mistakes, we can warn you guys about the mistakes we made. I don't know. And again, I'm giving you advice that was given to me, that I applied, that worked for me. And, you know, I don't want to be legalistic and say you got to do it this way. Everybody's circumstance is different. Everybody, you know, finds themselves in life in a different situation. So, you know, take it for what it's worth. You know, by the grace of God, I've been married 37 years. You know, if it wasn't for his grace, I would just be a statistic in America, you know, that I was divorced. Honestly, I'm not just saying that, you know, it's the truth. I know it's the truth, and my wife would attest to that's the truth too. So, you know, I always say I never knew what happiness was till I got married, and then it was too late. And, you know, just a corny joke I use. But, you know, praise the Lord that it's not about happiness. It's about commitment. So thank God it's not about happiness, because we wouldn't have lasted, because you're not always happy when you're married. But to stay married, you have to be committed, and then happiness follows. Commitment, then happiness. Now, Dr. James Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family, a great ministry that I still recommend people go to get family advice. He gave me the best advice ever. He said, don't marry the person you think you can live with. marry the person you can't live without, because if you can't live without them, you'll fight for them, you know? So, but once you're married, I asked a guy who's married 50 years. I remember I was a young Christian, and I was married about a year. I said, how'd you stay married 50 years? He goes, it's simple. Just don't die and don't leave. So I thought that was kind of funny. But Jesus tells us, men, and, you know, I'm giving this from a man's point of view. There's some things that you wives maybe could pick up from this, I hope. But I can only tell you from a man's point of view what God showed me. Jesus said, husbands, love your wives the way God, or St. Paul said it actually, love your wives the way Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So how did Christ love the church? Well, I'll give you just practical things in my life. Jesus had it made. He had heaven. Everything was wonderful. But he came down and became a man for us and died the most torturous death. And while he was alive, he had a hammer nails, be a blue-collar guy, carpenter, sweat. I'm sure he hammered his fingers at times, that he felt pain, he felt sorry. So he put us first and his comfort second and his wants and needs second. And that's what I told all my children when they got married. Now your spouse becomes number one in your life. If you know. And practically, I remember, you know, if you know my testimony, I grew up in the hood. I was always fighting and getting high, drinking, but I actually fought because I liked fighting. It was like, I don't know, I liked the street fight. You know, it sounds stupid. It is stupid, but I liked it. So when I became a Christian, I knew that was bad. So I just kind of like always read about martial arts, and most of them just seemed like ridiculous. I knew from being a street fighter that wouldn't work. And I read, it was like 1986, I read about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I actually wrote one of the Gracies. His name was Horian Gracie, and he wrote me back. And I had the letter for years. I don't know what happened to it, but I kept the letter for like at least 20 years. It was a handwritten letter. I wrote handwritten, and he wrote handwritten back. And I asked him, I said, hey, I see what you're saying about fighting, and I think, yeah, what all your principles are right. That would work in a street fight. Do you have a school nearby? And he said, no. You know, I teach in California out of my garage, but you know, take a combat sport, do boxing, wrestling, or judo. And we had all three on our base. And I remember going to boxing, and they had a Navy boxer there, and the coach was like, hey, I need someone to spar with him. Who's 155? I'm like, I'm 155. He's like, no, you're not ready yet. You just started. It was like my first day. I'm like, we talking about to run 5 miles a day? He goes, no, it's a different kind of cardio. So the next day, same question. For some reason, they didn't have a lot of 155 pounders, and had another Navy. You know, these guys were on the Navy team, but they let us train with them. So they were good boxers. So the 155 then guy, he was shorter, but he was real stocky and strong. You know, I was kind of a little taller and thinner. I was really thin. And so I'm like, let me spar with him. So finally, coach was like, yeah, I'm gonna teach you a lesson today. Go ahead, you can spar with him. So as a street fighter, I learned who was more aggressive won. You know, strike first, your chances of winning are 90%. Strike hard, strike fast, strike often, you know. Everybody knows that. So I came at this guy like Boom Boom Mancini. Met him in the middle of the ring. Boom, boom. His nose was bleeding, his mouth was bleeding. And I'm pummeling this guy. And then after a while, I'm like out of breath. I didn't have the boxing cardio that I thought I had. I looked over at the coach. I go, how much time's left? He's like 2 minutes. I'm like, oh no. So the rest of the sparring, I think we went 3 rounds. He just pummeled me. He just wiped the blood off his nose and his mouth, and he didn't even break a sweat. And he just kept hitting me, and you know, I just had to keep covering up. And if it was a real fight, he beat me by points, like killed me on points, won every round. So anyway, the coach said, man, you got a lot of skill. You just got to build up your cardio. And I had like dreams, like, man, I'm going to go, be Olympic boxer. I'm going to do this, do that. But my wife was home with a child. And, she looked forward to me coming home, at night and helping her out. She's been home all day taking care of the baby. So I felt convicted, I had to give that up. Then, when I went back to Jersey, when I got out of the Navy a few years later, there was a school about an hour from my house, and they did grappling and kickboxing, and I went, and it was like pretty cool. We did shoot fighting and Muay Thai. It was like real stuff you could use on the street, so I thought it was pretty cool. And then he said, I'm gonna have these 6 brothers. They're called the Gracies: Hoist, Hoyler, Hickson, Henzo was a cousin, Hoyler. And I was like, I know these guys. I wrote Horry in a letter, so I met them. I was all excited. They believe it, 6 Gracies. Right now, it would cost you thousands of dollars to have all these guys in one place. But no one knew what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was. I was on. I'm like, no, these guys are cool. And my instructor, who was a wrestler, a Division I wrestler, a shoot fighter, he's like, yeah, I heard these guys were really good. So it was like $25 for the seminar. And all the Gracies destroyed my instructor. He's like, okay, we're going to have this taught here. So it wasn't a Gracie, but it was someone who got their black belt from Gracie. At the time, he only had a brown belt. And he was going to teach there. And I knew this was the future. I told all my friends at the first UFC, I bet on Hoist. And I was like, there's no way Hoist is going to win. It was a friendly bet, but I knew he would win. And I was like, this is the future. And again, now my wife, we had a couple kids and she was homeschooling. And I worked all day. And I said, you know what? This isn't fair. I'm going out, having fun at night, learning this. I'm going to give it up. And, just come straight home from work because my wife needs me. And if you're a single guy, you're like, man, that sucks. But when Jesus was describing marriage, the disciples said, wow, why would anybody want to get married? There is some parts of marriage that sucks because you're not living for yourself. You have to put your wife first. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't, she was very submissive, she was being taught in our church to, submit to your husband. She would never complain and tell me that. But I just felt convicted. I felt bad. She's home all day alone. And then, I wasn't getting home from work till like 8 o'clock at night. I was leaving when everybody was sleeping. So I gave that up. And my kids were like, oh man, now that my kids are older and they wrestle and they do judo and they, they know all about jiu-jitsu, like, man, Dad, you'd be like the highest ranking belt in America if you would have stuck with it. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But you know what I would have missed? As you kids got old and my wife was homeschooling you guys, when I came home and I smelt that fresh bacon bread, my wife's beautiful smile on her face, and all my kids running up, jumping in my arms, and me taking them outside to play touch football and wiffle ball, I would have missed that. And we wouldn't have the relationship we have now. Me and my sons are best friends. My best friends are my 5 kids, my 4 sons and my daughter, and my wife. These are my best friends. So this is what I learned. Christ put us first. If we're going to love our wives like Christ loved us, we put our wives first. Jesus also said, if you lust with your eyes, you're committing adultery. Billy Graham gave great advice about that. The don't look twice rule. I think I shared this with you a couple weeks ago. See a beautiful girl, don't look twice. It's human nature. We're gonna look like, wow, that girl's beautiful. But don't keep looking. And then don't go in and talk thinking it's just gonna be an interesting conversation if you know you're attracted to her. Run like Joseph ran away from Potiphar's wife. Great advice from the late Billy Graham. Billy Graham's other rule, the other Billy Graham rule, never be alone with a woman who isn't your wife. Another great advice from Billy Graham. So these are practical things that we can do to live out the biblical commands of Jesus, And Jesus, I feel like I'm missing a lot, but I'm just going to talk like if you were in my living room with me. I hope you don't mind. Jesus also told us that we are, or St. Paul, like I said, I'm not going to exegete, but the Bible tells us that we're the stronger of the 2, men. And men love to hear that verse. And, it's obvious physically we're stronger. When I was in the Navy, we would stand at attention and women would faint all the time. And I researched this. Back then you didn't have Google, but I used to have so many medical books I would read. And I found out that women have 20% less red blood cells than us. That's why they faint. And, and the feminists ain't going to want to hear this truth, but in the military, women don't go through the same training as men. They do their push-ups on their knees. They don't have to run as far. They don't have to run as fast. They do less, you know. Same thing with cops. I know a lot of cops. I remember back in the day, Minnesota had a really cool gun they used, but it was too heavy for women, so they had to use a less effective gun so women could shoot it. I have friends, you know, where I grew up in Newark and Irvington, New Jersey, that are cops, and they tell me if a female's called to the projects, she's not allowed to go in alone. She has to wait for male backup. I mean, this is just the reality, you know. The feminists, the liberals, the woke, they don't live in reality land. I'm telling you, you know, I know all you guys heard this, you know, and you understand this, but I've lived it. I actually before I moved down here, I went for a police test. I went for a fireman test. I had to pull a 250-pound dummy 100 yards. The women had to pull a 100-pound. I'm like, oh, so they don't, what happens if a 250-pound man is dying in a burning building? If a woman firefighter's there, they're screwed. You know, this is the reality we live with today because of wokeism and liberalism, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. I'm just going to give you an example. When I came down here, there was a really good town, Kenilworth, New Jersey. They paid their police well, low crime, upscale neighborhood, and they wanted one cop. And they opened it up for 24 hours, 100 applications, and I got it. I was like, wow, this is meant to be. I really thought it was meant to be. I was going to be a cop in Kenilworth. And first thing they did was a physical, and I was 30 at the time, so I freaking killed it. There was me and this kid who just graduated high school. He was a wrestler. We went 1 for 1, and he barely beat me out because on the 50-yard dash, he came in first, I came in second. So I had pulled a hamstring before that. But at 100 guys, I was still number 2, and he was number 1. But then I killed him on. He thought he was going to beat me. He did 14 pull-ups. I did 17 pull-ups. When it was said, they said he beat me by just a hair. You know, they had a point system because they did a bunch of other little things. But they took the top 20 and they let us take a written test. And I've taken some cop tests and some tests, and they were just like weird stuff. I didn't do that well, but this one was freaking tailor-made for me. They wanted to know who all the president's cabinet was, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Navy, all the justices' name, all about, you know, government, politics. I was like, this was tailor-made for me. I think I aced this. And then that was half, and the other half was just practical stuff. What would you do in this situation? What would you do in this? And again, this is like tailor-made for me. So I really felt like I aced it. Turned out I did ace it. But when I got out, there was a bunch of college graduated kids. I swear, one guy's like, I got a master's degree. I never learned any of this stuff. I was like, well, how do you think I did? He goes, I think I failed. I didn't know anything. How did they expect us to know this? And here me, a high school dropout, I got my GED in the Navy. I was just like, I don't know. So they called the top 5 from that test to go in for an interview. And this is where I think I messed up. They asked me, if you were in a bar fight, who would you rather have come for backup, a woman or a man? Now, I try to be like the Lord and not lie, but, you know, like Jesus said, you know, when they said, you know, our law says to stone this woman. What do you say, you know, Mr. Nice Guy, Mr. All Love and Forgiveness? Are you going to go against the law of Moses? And he's like, yeah, you're right. That's what the law says. So who's ever without sins, throw the first stone. So I try to have that kind of nuance to my answer. And I said, well, you know, if the woman was a black belt in judo and strong, and the guy cop was a wimpy, skinny guy who was a nerd, I'd rather have the woman. And then they asked me about the Second Amendment, and I had to be honest, and I think that's what really, you know, this is liberal New Jersey. So I thought that's what killed me. So I didn't get the job, and like 2 months later, I think it was a chief, deputy chief, captain, and a sergeant. It was like 4 guys up there. But I seen one of the guys, I think he was a captain in a Publix, or no, I'm sorry, they didn't have Publix up there. I think it was a ShopRite in New Jersey. And I said, hey, I'm assuming I didn't get the job because nobody called me. And he goes, yeah, he goes, bro, between you and me, they knew who was going to be before. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, that female guy, we had no females on the force. We had to hire a female. So that's reality. I'm telling you like it is. I'm not saying every female don't deserve her job. I'm just telling you this is reality. So anyway, I got off track a little bit here, but you know, it was God's will, whatever. You know, I'm here in Florida. I probably would have never left. And who knows, there might have been, I've been a blue collar Catholic, you know. So, but getting back on track. So we all know, unless, like I said, unless you're a feminist, that's a science denier, men are stronger than women physically. But the Bible's also kind of saying we're stronger emotionally. And I researched this too. You know, and it's not just hormones. You know, women hate when you say you're emotional because your hormones. Again, it's the way our blood is and different cells and stuff, you know. And testosterone, you know, guys with high testosterone, we tend not to get all emotional and sensitive, you know. So this is the part men don't want, though. We have to be the stronger emotional, you know. And now this goes to the heart of the matter, what Dr. Scott Hahn said about forgiveness and loving the church like Jesus loved the church. We got to be willing to forgive our wives no matter what. If we're both stressed out and we're both feeling hurt emotionally, we got to man up. We got to man up. We got to suck it up. And we got to forgive no matter what they did to us. And you're like, well, there's some things we just can't forgive. What could be worse than denying our Lord Jesus Christ? When Peter denied Jesus, Jesus forgave him. And I've told this story before, how Jesus said to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And he said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he said, basically, feed my sheep. But then Jesus asked him again, Peter, do you love me? And he said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he said again, feed my sheep. And then Jesus asked him a third time. And everybody knows, you know, Peter denied him 3 times. Jesus forgave him 3 times. Wow, that's cool. But it's even deeper, because Jesus asked him a third time, and Peter cried and said, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. But the Greek words that were used were different. You see, in English, there's just one word for love. In the Greek, there's like 4. And the greatest love is agape love. That's what Jesus, for God to agape the world. It's sacrificial love. You will die for the other person because you love them so much. And another word is friendship, or brotherly love. And another word is romantic, erotic love. And another love is, you know, like a love of a mother and a child. Jesus, the first 2 times, said, do you agape love me? And Peter said, I love you like a brother, Lord. And then Peter said, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you like a brother. Because he's saying, you know all things. You know I couldn't die for you. I don't have it in me. I can't sacrificial love you. But Jesus said to him the last time, the 3rd time, do you love me like a brother, Peter? He said, Lord, I love you like a brother. So Jesus accepted Peter the way he was. He allowed Peter to love him the way he could. He didn't demand Peter to agape love him the way he loved us. And sometimes we have to allow our wives to love us in the capacity they can. We can't force them to love us a certain way. But we got to be the stronger one. We're called, you know, we're called to be the stronger one. We have to forgive them. And we have to suck it up no matter how much it hurts. We got to be the man of the house and forgive them and love them the way Christ loved us. And ideally, they will respond with agape love back. But that's not why we do it. We do it because we love them and we want the best for them, physically, emotionally, spiritually. We're seeking out their best. We're putting them first. We're dying for them. We're dying to ourselves like Christ physically died for us. And again, men love that verse where it shows us we're the head of the household. Amen. We're the head of the household. But that means we're responsible for the household. When I was in the Navy, I remember this captain. You know, to be a captain in the Navy is a big thing for officers. Once they get their ship and they're in control, that's what they live for. That's what their whole career is, to get that ship. And I remember there was a storm in Cuba, and the captain was on the base, but there was other sailors on the ship, and the ship needed to be moved. And normally the captain doesn't actually steer the ship. He usually has like a quartermaster, just a regular enlisted guy, you know, actually does the steering. You know, the helmsman is usually not an officer. The captain will tell him, you know, where to go. The captain called the ship and said, hey, there's a storm. You got to move that ship because it's going to tear up the dock. So he called his executive officer, the officer, the commander right below him. So the commander had the helmsman, just a regular quartermaster, move the ship out. But he crashed into another ship. Guess who got in trouble? The captain. The captain that was on the shore. When you say, well, he wasn't even on the ship, how'd he get in trouble? He was in charge of that ship. It was his responsibility. So you may say, my marriage is failing. It's not my fault. I'm doing everything I want. Well, you want to be the head of the household? You want to be the man of the house? Well, the man of the house takes responsibility for his ship. If your ship is sinking, you need to get on your knees and pray for the grace of God to save your ship. If your ship is sinking, man of God, you're responsible. Rise up, man of God. And as a Catholic, we know that marriage is a sacrament. And what is a sacrament? It's a physical mean of God's grace. It's not like a symbolic, like Protestant thinks. It has no meaning. It's just, it's grace. A sacrament is grace. It's real. It's power. It's supernatural. Ask for that grace from your sacrament, the sacrament of marriage that God gave you. And if you need to go to confession, receive grace from the sacrament of confession. Receive grace from the sacrament of the Eucharist. We have so much to build us up as Catholic men. And marriage is preparing us for heaven. That's why it's a sacrament. As we forgive our wives, as we love our wives, as our wives love us and forgive us, we're becoming more Christ-like. We're becoming more Christ-like. And this is another reason we call it a sacrament, because it's preparing us, it's leading us, it's giving us the grace to make it to heaven. So these are the lessons I've learned as a Christian. And like I said, I still make a lot of mistakes. You'll still make a lot of mistakes. And no matter where you find yourself, you might have gave up on your marriage, or your spouse might have gave up on your marriage, and it's not in your, it's not in your hands anymore. Trust God for a miracle. I've had some great testimonies in my life. I used to, we used to have testimony night every Wednesday night at this Pentecostal church I went to, and everyone was like, man, you always got a testimony. I wish I had your testimonies. I said, well, the only way you get a great testimony is if you have a trial. Do you want my trials? You want to trade my life? Trying to raise 5 kids while the wife stays home and homeschools, making peanuts as a blue-collar guy. There's a lot of trials I've been going through, but God always, when you have nothing but God, then you realize you need nothing but God. And so you might be in a situation where it looks impossible for you to have a testimony. Ask God for a testimony. Ask God for a miracle. I've seen more miracles in the Catholic Church than all the Pentecostal churches I've been to. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That God who healed the blind and made the lame walk is the God that lives in us. It's the God that loves you. So he can heal your marriage no matter what the situation is. So there you have it. God bless and stay Catholic.